Okay, we'll make a start then on this one. It's slightly technical, but it's not bad for a multiple choice type exam. There are quite a lot of facts, and just the three learning outcomes that you can probably see there. So obviously there's roughly 15 questions from each area. So question one, or learning out, sorry, it isn't question one, no, this is it. So 15 questions from contracting. So various types of contracts and pricing. And one of my favourites, not yours, investment appraisal, payback and all that. Section 2 is programme leadership approaches, which is pricing, financial management, budgets, and some legal stuff, damages, performance, termination. And then section 3's a bit of a strange one because it's all about culture. And it names the cultural web. It names the levels of culture from Shine, which I don't think we've done before. And the 4 types of culture from Handy. And guess what? Ofsted's culture's in there here as well. And a bit more on tools and techniques for cultural change. So 3 is pretty unique. It's just culture and change management, which you've done some of before. Section 2 was pricing, costing, and section 1 is this rather technical, I think, contracting options. Right, if I go to share screen again, stop share. Sorry, there's possibly a better way of doing this, but I've not worked it out yet. Share screen, and if we go to, there we go. Right, so if we go to the slideshow from current slide, and you can unmute and shout if you want. I don't know if you're self-muted or whether I've accidentally muted you.
No, I've just muted myself, Dave, in case.
Okay, I'll let it. I've unmuted you, right? Okay, all right. Let's go through this. So yeah, the standard opening slide. Mentioned those tips recommend. And you can probably guess how much of the cost does it cover. Would you guess if you pay £53 for this quite large book? Do you think it covers it all? No, it covers probably 40% of the cost. So I wouldn't recommend going out and buying it, to be honest. Right, the module purpose: contracting, leadership of strategic programs, and successful managing contracts. And that's the whole module content. So obviously for revision, you've got to tick off these bullet points and say, yes, I know something about each of those, because that's going to be the questions. So as you know, it's quite easy to revise for these. It is just a matter of going through the bullet points and making sure you know something on these. So the first one, 1.1, is contracting options. And the book is quite convoluted on this. And the options here are client coordinated, the EPC design and build contracts, management contracting, and again, design and build, operate ownership forms, and public and private partnerships. Quite a big range there. What it's trying to say is you can do it the traditional way, which was adversarial, which is pretty much do it separate. You get someone to do the design for you. Once you've got the design, you then go out to tender, bash the suppliers around and get the lowest price. And it's quite adversarial. So that was the traditional method. And then we've got the more integrated method, which is design and build, where you appoint someone who designs it and builds it. So they do the lot. So hence it gets called turnkey. And then we've got the management contract and construction management, which is, I can hear a baby, is more deliverables. And then we've got the design, build, operate, which is more the private finance, PPPs. So once you split it down, it's not too bad, this. But SIPs make a right mess of the first one, client coordinating. I'll explain in a second.
Isla, give her one. Give her one. And please stop whinging about everything this morning. What's the matter with you?
Are you all right there, Carly? Sorry, I just noticed you.
Right, I give her one.
Are you okay?
You all right, Carly?
Oh, sorry. Am I on that? Sorry.
You're okay.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, am I shouting at my phone?
Hi.
No,
I'll put myself on mute.
no, we thought Ryan was in tears, but we realised you joined.
Sorry. Fighting over swords.
So we just mentioned there was a textbook, don't buy it. And we're just literally looking at some definitions there of projects, program management, and portfolios. It is important to understand the difference that programs are a set of projects to achieve an outcome, and projects are an individual thing that have objectives and deliverables. And a portfolio is all the programs and projects in a company. So there's two definitions there, which I'm not going to spend too long on. But you can see program management is about running different projects. So you might have project A, build a new school at York, project B, build a new one in Manchester, and all the program is there to improve education, say in Northern England. So the overall outcome is made up of individual projects. And so projects are slightly different than programs. Projects are more deliverables, finite, delivering product or outcome, and programs are more vision, more high level, and more about benefits realization. So there's a subtle difference there between projects and programs, which is mentioned in the study guide. And there you can see a schematic of portfolios in a company made up of projects and programs. And we mentioned briefly difference between outputs and outcomes. So an output might be build a bridge, and the outcome are the long-term benefits to the local community, what's changed. Outputs what we do, outcomes where the difference is there. And there's an example there which I've probably used with you before from Innovation Network. Outputs are design, number of miles, outcomes are the difference made. So just some concepts there. It isn't covered particularly well in the introduction in the study guide, but it's sort of hidden in there in the first chapter. So we're okay on that. Okay, again, a bit more on projects, programs. There'll only be at best one question on that. Right, this is where it gets interesting. The study guide, for some reason, throws in the the purchasing development tool from Veale, W-E-L-E. It's in L6M3 as well. So if you're doing L6M3, you need to know this model because it was asked in the last exam. And it's supposed to show purchasing has developed from transactional right through to maybe value chain orientation. Of course, it can be at different levels in different companies. And the book is trying badly to link this to how in projects you need to be perhaps not confrontational, but more cross-functional and more integrated. I think a better view is the diagram from the Van Veale textbook, which actually shows the difference between transactional right through to value chain. The sort of focus moves from serve the factory, buy what they want, right through to value chain integration. And there are the different levels there. Functional, right up to internal, then you get more cross-functional. That's the same diagram, perhaps a little clearer. And then the study guide lists what happens under a transaction, what happens under commercial, what happens under coordinated, internal, external, and value. I really don't understand why it's in the study guide and what on earth it's got to do with project management, to be honest. Apart from maybe some purchasing departments haven't got the capability to manage projects if they aren't developed enough. You need people with these higher skills, and you need enough people with enough experience to help manage and coordinate projects. So that model's there in the book, but I really wouldn't beat yourself up, except if you're doing L6M3, because it's in there as well. So it's worth learning just for that. But strictly, it's how developed is your procurement? Is it transactional, or is it more commercial, etc.? So that model's there, but take it with a pinch of salt. What it should really be talking about is, are you running a more traditional approach, which is the design, bid and build, which is the adversarial one, where you pay someone probably as cheap as possible to design it, and then you get somebody else after tendering to build it. And of course the problems arise because the builder didn't design it. They'll say, well, that doesn't work and we can't do this because of that. And it can lead to big problems, but it can be, for simple projects, a very efficient way of doing it. And then there's the more collaborative methods, such as full turnkey, not turkey, the integrated EPC contracts, design and build. And we've also got management contract, which is more packaged. It's contracted in lots. So a few big words there. If we look at the traditional method, design and construction are separate. The employer gets the design done, and then they tender and get a contractor to build the project. And that's often called design, bid, build, which is the adversarial traditional method. But it's quite inefficient and it does have problems. There's the advantages. Employer retains control of design. The contractor building a complete should be easy to employ to minimise overruns. Bit more certainty, but the contractor has limited or no input in the design, and that can cause problems. Can take longer because it's quite sequential. There's more risk. There's little incentive for the contractor to point out problems. Less flexibility, and it's quite adversarial. So that's the traditional method. And then named in your structure, in your content, sorry, is the EPC contract, or engineering, procurement, construction. And it's an important form of contracting in construction engineering. The engineering and construction contractor will carry out the design, procure all the equipment, and then construct it. Companies that deliver EPC projects are commonly, guess what, called EPC contractors. And these contracts are often called turnkey because you're given a completely proven facility. It's handed over, literally the key to, there you go, it works, we've tested it, we've proved it, we've built it, there you are, pay up. So hence turnkey. And there's just a little detail on engineering, prepare the designs, prepare the standards, then procuring of equipment, the site, and then construction. Importantly, can you see commissioning is in there and testing. So it isn't just building a house and running, it's more an engineering effort like a process plant. And there's the EPC again, engineer, procure, construct.
Dave?
Yeah.
Is this like how the NEC contracts would work, or is this different?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. There is an NEC contract that you can use for EPC contracts, and it's called something like EPS. And you would use pricing option, it's ARB, which is a fixed lump sum, paid on milestones. So there is one of the NECs you can use for this, if you get the right payment option. Otherwise, you would use one of the FIDIC contracts. But there is an NEC that fits EPC. And when we look at that, I'll point, I can't remember the name of it, but it is something like EP, engineering and construction contract.
Right, okay.
And then you just pick the payment, not by incentive contract. You wouldn't do incentive. You would actually either pay on milestones.
Yeah.
You could pay on activity schedule, but a bill of materials, sorry, but you wouldn't. You'd do it
Okay.
as once you've, put the walls up, you get this much once you've done that. So there is an NEC, but there's also FIDIC. So it's a sort of generic name for a type of design and build.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
NEC has one contract that'll fit it, and we'll say FIDIC has another. Right, and there's the relationship. The client simply has to appoint the contractor who does it all. Deals with the suppliers, the subcontractors, consultants. They design it, they build it, and it's a nice, straightforward relationship there. There's the timeline. The employer defines the object, sets the outcomes, and there has to be some scope. You have to tell the supplier what you want, but they have to then develop the design, construct it, commission it, and correct any defects. So there is some input from the employer. They aren't just blank sheet. They do have to give some design criteria or standards to the contractor. So there is a timeline there. From the study guide, EPC features, it's fixed price, fixed date maybe. There's limited contractor claims, and there's limits of liability. I'm not sure you'd need to learn all them descriptions, but I think you would need to have an idea, if you got a multiple choice, which of the following is a feature of EPC contracts. So I would learn that feature list. Bathtub curb, you did it maybe in operations management. So what happens when you build a new KitKat factory? You turn the machine on, it maybe doesn't work right to start with. You have a lot of failures, teething problems when you're commissioning it, and then it starts running properly, and it'll run for 10 or 15 years, and then it's added and it starts breaking down more. So the study guide throws in the bathtub curb, because a feature of EPC contracts are that you'll actually have to test the plant and commission it before you can hand it over to the client. So that's just a concept. Be very easy to ask a question on, won't it, that? There is the study guide does mention EPCM in a paragraph, and it's not strictly the same as EPC. It's more for service contracts, and the contractor isn't involved in the building and construction, but is more responsible for design and management. And that's all you need to know on that. The EPCM is different. So advantages of turnkey, pretty straightforward. Maximum responsibility in the hands of one company. They can't say, well, we didn't design it, it's not our problem. It's probably quicker, encourages innovation, avoids diseconomies, minimises claims. But if you get the wrong supplier and it doesn't work, you're stuck. Price must reflect the high risk and responsibility assumed by the contractor. It's all on their head. They've got to design it, build it, run it, commission it. And the contractor may skimp on areas beyond the contract terms, such as safety. So that would apply to any turnkey contract, any EPC contract, any design and build contract. And there's your design and build. The employee appoints a contractor who does it all. So advantages of design and build, pretty much the same as turnkey. Depends which book you look at. It's practically the same, because it's still a turnkey contract. So be clear on the advantages and disadvantages. I'm sure that's the same list. So we probably should say design and build stroke turnkey stroke EPC there. Strictly though, design and build, sorry, just to give you a clearer difference, could be simply building a school or a hospital or something. There might not be any commissioning. It might be just simply, not engineering. Design and build then, same sort of list of advantages, disadvantages. I'm not going to go through that again. And then we've got this rather difficult area, I think, the third route. So you can use traditional, you can use design and build stroke EPC, or you can use management contracting or construction management, which is more letting the contracts in lots, and you're more involved there. So management contracting, there's a diagram there showing the purchaser contract with the designer, and they also contract with a management contractor who hires the works contractors. And there's a subtle difference with construction management there, that the purchaser actually hires the contractors. And you think, oh, I'm not sure about that. But if I look at the SIPS diagram there, to be fair to SIPS, it's a little clearer. That's the diagram from the SIPS book showing the employer contracts with the designer and the management contractor. And there are advantages because of the overlapping of the stages. The program's likely to be quicker. The management contractor and works contractors can contribute to the design and planning. And if the packages have yet to be tendered, then changes can be accommodated, and the packages are awarded competitively. So can you see this is done in bits, packages, rather than all at once integrated? But there are disadvantages. It can cost a fortune, and you aren't sure of the cost until everything's been tendered. And it depends how good the management contractor is. And if we look later at the construction management, the advantages and disadvantages are about the same. So management contract is complex, but there's this overlap and flexibility in there. Then we've got construction management, which gets rather complex, where the employer is hiring a construction manager who's going to contract with the trade contractors. So rather than the employer doing it themselves, the construction manager does it. The SIPS diagram's on the left there, and the diagram from one of the better known books, which I think is clearer, is on the right there. So there's a subtle difference there. The advantages and disadvantages are practically the same. Design coordination, no cost certainty. Scottish Parliament was built under construction management. The estimated cost was 40 million and the final cost was 404 million. So if you want to get started quickly on the project, use construction stroke management. And put a slide there with the advantages, disadvantages, which are, to be fair, the same as the SIPs, which are there. It's a little complex, and you just have to spend 10 minutes getting your head around what's the subtle difference and how is it different in the events. But it's quite easy to learn. And we've got and then there's kind of PFI in the middle, BOTOs, DBFO, and right across from where you give complete responsibility to the private sector. In the middle is both. The study gets us in, government's trying to get value for money from PFI, economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. Does anyone know what the 4 E is that's in the study guide? That's the 4 E's now, not the 3 E's. Anyone know what the 4 E is? Equity. Equity. Typical cost structure of a PFI project, what is that, you might say? Well, a PFI company will set an SPV, specialty, which raises finance and runs the project, and hopefully it generates funds to help the people who lend money. So PFI is a different animal. I wouldn't learn the full diagram, I just remember there is a SPV. They're very acronyms, boot, boo, BDO, bot, quite easy to learn, but I would learn them. They're self-explanatory, aren't they? So when you do a boot contract, there are different packages, different packages. Advantages of boot, additionality, credibility, efficiencies, asset promotes efficiencies, technology transfer, privatisation, and off-balance sheet financing. So the government's loved it for years, but it's fallen out of favour now. The government at the moment has said they won't use it anymore. But if you run out of money, the private sector finds the money, builds the facilities, and then charges the government extortionate rates for 25 years or 30 years to use the facility. So it does have advantages. Government doesn't have to borrow large amounts of money. They don't have to get into debt, but they do have to take this long-term commitment on to pay for the PFI project. So why PPP? I've already said it avoids them having to find the money. Private sector companies get regular payment for a long period, so it's beneficial to them. There can be freestanding. Services can be sold to the public sector, or there can be joint ventures. Not many joint ventures around, actually. Sorry, same slide. Advantages, same thing. Limited funds can be supported by private sector. Skills and capacity can be supported by the private sector. Risk shared. Helps develop larger infrastructures. So lots of advantages, but lots of criticisms about the cost and commitment. Cutting corners, and managing the contract can be quite difficult. And that's the study guide. Advantages, which are worth learning, and then there is the disadvantages of PPP. So if you aren't familiar with PPP, you really do need to learn them tool lists, I would say. You don't need to know too much about the SPV, special purpose vehicle, but you do need to understand the basic mechanics and definitely the advantages and disadvantages. And I must admit, I've never ever been a fan of PFI and PPP. It really is an inefficient way of contracting, I think.
Dave, sorry, I must have missed it, but what does PFI and PPP stand for again?
Right. Public-private partnership is PPP.
Okay.
And PFI is private finance initiative, which is a form of PPP.
Okay.
So PFI is a subset of PPP. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm just writing it down.
Yeah, and it's basically how the government's built hospitals, colleges, prisons, etc.
And what was PPP again? Sorry.
Public-private partnerships.
Public-private partnership. Okay.
Yeah. And to be fair to the study guide, there's this summary of contracting features at the end of the chapter. And I think it's rather good, actually, when you're trying to get your head around all of what we've looked at. They've put together there the EPC, management contracting. They haven't done construction management, but it's about the same. DBO, design, build, operate. And can you say the advantages, disadvantages are practically identical, EPC and DBO? And then we've got PPP, which is the government thing. It's not for the private sector. Well, private sector will build the schools, but it's not something, if you worked in the private sector, that you would use. So I do like that summary slide there. I don't know if you've spotted it in the study guide. And I've added it to my set of notes. Yes, you'll probably hate me for it, but I'll send out a revised set probably early next week with some changes I've made. So that slide, I think, is excellent for just trying to get your head together on the key differences, and it would make a good revision aid, that. Okay, now we're on to the actual contracts. They actually name these NEC, FIDIC, IMEC, JCT, SIPS, and then they say you need to compare them. Now, the exemplar exam from SIPS simply had a question: what are the benefits of using standard form contracts? And it listed 6 things. I think you had to pick 2 out. But I don't think you're going to be as lucky as that in your real exam. You would expect there could be a bit more technical questions, but hopefully not too much. So many times you've done the advantages of standard contracts: reduces time, don't reinvent the wheel, bit fairer to both parties, even-handed, and the clauses are easy to understand, correct legal terminology. But there are disadvantages, maybe less advantageous than you could get through negotiation. They can be too generic, and they might not have the special clauses that you need, and there might be some training costs. So make sure you're clear on the standard advantages and disadvantages. The exemplar exam on the SIPS website, and it's in my mocks, has one question on that. And guess how many questions the exemplar has on the other bits on there? None. There isn't a question on FIDIC, NEC, IMEC or anything on the exemplar, which is very odd. Key terms: contractor's responsibility, meetings, indemnities, dispute resolution, fairly standard stuff in a contract. We've got the NEC, which you've all done before to some extent. It's a much clearer, simple language. There's core clauses. It sets out the duties. It's fair. Present tense. Standalone clauses, no cross-referencing. Clear layout. And they've all got the same layout. It factor onto NEC 4 now. So the exam might quote NEC 3, but strictly we've moved to NEC 4 now. And there's the contracts. There is a suite of them: ECC, ECSC, right through to AC. And going back to Lucy's question earlier, can you see we've got the ECS contract there? Engineering and Construction Subcontract. And the ECC, Engineering and Construction Contract, which are their versions, if you like, of EPC. But you've got the various 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's about 11 different types there. Don't learn all the acronyms. So there's the standard NEC, which I can unfortunately now see my sleep. There are the 9 core clauses: general terms, contractor responsibilities, time, testing. So make sure you're fairly clear what the core are. So that means every NEC contract's got them. Then in the middle, they don't call them pricing clauses. They call them main options, but they are pricing options. And you've got the fixed price with activity schedule. You've got the fixed price with bill of quantities, or you've got target costs, cost plus, DMA, and the management contract. And then you've got secondary clauses, X clauses, such as inflation, currencies, etc. Again, don't learn all them, and there are Z options for disputes. So the 9 core clauses, fairly straightforward. You can see testing and defects is in there. Compensation offence, which is variation clauses probably in your language. Risk. So be clear what the core clauses are. Contract data is important, and that's part of the documents, which will have the starting date, details. It's in 2 parts, so just learn the definition. The NEC contracts, they're the pricing options with a bit more detail: fixed price, target price, cost reimbursable. So that's the pricing options from the, from the middle one there, with a little more detail, not them. They're the pricing ones. So if you're familiar with those, they're going to hold you good for question 2 as well, which is costing of contracts. And the option clauses, again, I don't think I'd learn those, but I'd maybe learn that the X clauses are optionals, such as compensation events is the term NEC uses. They don't call them variations or loss and expense. They call them compensation events.
Is this exam multiple choice?
Yes.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, it is. There's one scenario with 5 or 6 questions from it,
right,
from across the syllabus, and the rest of them are mini scenarios or just straightforward. Which of the following?
And have you've done a test site for this one, test bank of questions as well, Dave?
Yeah, I've got I think 120 in the test bank. Yeah, it's quite good at the questions. So it's how far you go down the route learning, or whether you dive into questions and dip into knowledge when you get stuck. It is arguable which is the best way.
Sorry, Dave, have you sent the test mods link to us? I don't know if I've got it.
I can't remember.
No, I don't think you have.
No.
Right. Well, it's one of those I think I have, but I probably haven't. So yeah, I will send that. Yeah, and I've been through it again the last few days to make sure there was no gaps. So it's really as well if you want it setting up as 45 questions at random every time you try it, or whether.
Yeah.
Which I think is the harder way would be just to open it up, but you'd get 120 questions then. But I could have sent you a PDF with them all on for revising later to make sure you haven't missed any. But
Yeah, if you could do both of that with a PDF.
Yeah.
And then
do you think so? Yeah, PDF with everything on maybe and answers, and then leave the test set up as 45 questions, 15 from each chapter.
Yeah, I like that. It works well for me.
Does that work well? Yeah, I think so. And to be fair to SIPS, they did put a few more mock questions on the site about 6 weeks ago. I think there was only about 10 on the site. I think there's about 20 now. So I've put all those in. Plus, if anyone sat an exam, I've trolled the dreaded study group websites on Facebook and LinkedIn for what people said come up in their exams. Sometimes they're it's quite interesting to see, oh, there was a question on this. Oh, right, I better put one in my bank. But that's the problem. Some of the questions could have been written before the study guide was completed. And they certainly are asking some questions that aren't in the study guide. That's come up in quite a few exams. Not many, but some very strange questions that can only be set by someone who's looked at the content and thought, well, that's related to the content. They haven't looked at the book. So sometimes I go a bit broader than the book. So they're compensation events, NEC. There's a set procedure that has to be followed. Otherwise, the supplier's not going to get paid. Other forms of contract, ICE, Institute of Civil Engineers, MEC engineers, which is the MF1 to MF4s, which are for electrical and mechanical work and consultancy. In the contracts exam, they actually asked a question, which model form contracts would you use if you're having a new lift installed at work? And the answer was the IMEC standard forms, MF. It wasn't the NEC or FIDIC. But it was quite a difficult question, that. So we've got ICE, we've got IMEC, we've got FIDIC, and we've got JCT. Ooh, wonderful. The FIDIC, it generally goes by the colour of the book, whether it's silver, red, and there are various different model forms on FIDIC, sorry. And there's a document hierarchy from the contract agreement right through to other documents. And if there's a discrepancy, the document with highest priority takes precedence. Now that list there is in the study guide. And you can see there they call up the red book, the yellow book, and the red and yellow books. That's just the name for the different contracts. A criticism of FIDIC, it's said to have an English law bias. And again, that's from the study guide, just giving some background to FIDIC. How far do you go into it? It's very difficult to know, but FIDIC does have an EPC contract. You can see there in the bottom right, silver book. That's conditions of contract for EPC and turnkey contracts. So a little bit there on FIDIC, not too much. And then we've got the ICHEM model forms, which are very similar, red book, green book, and a burgundy book, wonderful. JCT tend to be fixed lump sums, use retention monies. And certainly I've seen a question on retention monies in contract terms, and I can't remember if it's on this L6M5 exam. And it went something like, which of the following terms would you use to limit your problems from defective products? And the answer was put in retention of monies clause, which used to be standard in building contracts. JC2 encourages use of LADs, liquidated damages. So a little bit on JCT there. And there's a comparison there, which I think is from one of the level 4 modules you took. Difference between JCT and NEC. Now they aren't going to ask you to compare and contrast, but they could give you a list and say which of these is a feature of JCT or which of these are a feature of NEC and mix them up a bit. And that's possibly how I'd learn this sort of stuff. And that was 1.2, so it's a bit frightening 1.2 because you've got NEC, JCT, FIDIC all named, but how detailed will they go into it? I'm not, very difficult to say. Right, what one you should be quite happy with, pricing. And I've already mentioned under NEC, pricing options A, B, C, D, etc., which cover all these. So what's, we'll go down. So the SIP standard slide, risk. Where's the risk? Well, you've low financial risk with a firm price, but high product or service risk, right through to cost plus, where you have high financial risk, but less risk of performance. So there's a risk ladder there. Pricing. Right, there's the NEC ones. Fixed price with activity, fixed price with bill of quantities, and then the target ones, cost reimbursable, management contract, and term contract. Fixed lump sum. The problem is you can't always get a fixed lump sum price, and if you insist it, they might give you a silly price. So there are advantages and disadvantages of fixed lump sum. If a project's going to go on for a few years, it's unlikely to work. But there's financial risk, there's cash flow management, there's supplier motivation, and simple admin, pretty obvious stuff. You can have a fixed price with review or redetermination, and that term's used in some of the textbooks, and that may be suited where the parties can't agree on a fixed price for the whole duration. So you might start, and then when you establish how the costs are going to work, you redetermine the price. Bill of quantity, pretty straightforward. You pay a set price for how many you've used. You need the plans, you need the specs, and you need the cost of the materials, obviously, to do that. Target costing is what it is. Starts at the other end, it's different than cost plus. The purchaser supplier estimate the maximum selling price. Maximum price is then negotiated, and the supplier works backwards to calculate the production cost. And hopefully I've got some examples in a minute. Target pain gain, contractor gains bonus if the cost is below, but shares the cost, the pain, if it goes above. And until completion, the contractor is reimbursed for all costs. Gives the contractor incentive to minimise costs. Compensation events can adjust the target price, and it's appropriate for well-defined projects. Note, compensation events increase the target price. So if you've changed the spec or something happened, that adjusts the target price by the amount. So it isn't calculated on that basis. And there's one. Pain gain is set at 50. The price cost is 500 million. So and the actual cost is 550. So the contractor gets 550 less 50% of the 50 million, which is 525. So the actual cost is 450. Sorry, if the actual cost is 450, the contractor gets 475 in total, higher profit. So you can play tunes on them numbers, but just be very clear. But they're still getting the cost, and it's really, are they going to get more than their target or less than their target? Well, it depends on how near the cost they were. So be very clear on pain gain. So incentivised contracts aren't just on cost. There could be for early delivery or better performance or meeting specific KPIs, sustainability, etc., etc. So there are many ways we can incentivise contracts. Then we've got the dreaded cost contracts, CPFF, CPIF, and CPAF. And they're the dangerous ones where you're going to give them the full cost no matter what, plus something else usually. Alternatives, cost without a fee, sharing, or time and materials. And that's pretty much all 1.3 is. Right, last little bit, I think, and I think we'll only do this today because 1.4, by the time we've finished this, takes us halfway through the slide deck. So even though it's only chapter 1, 50% of the slides and the content are on this first section. Right, can anyone remember anything about investment appraisal? Can anyone tell me something about discounted cash flow? Tell me what the techniques are or what it is. Who can tell me? What's discounted cash flow?
Something about net present value.
Yes.
That's all I can remember.
But that's a good start. Yeah, it's about, one of the techniques is net present value, and the other technique that uses discounting is internal rate of return, IRR. So there are two methods that use discounting, and that's net present value and internal rate of return. And to do the discount.
Will we be asked to work out figures and sums on this, Dave, as a question, do you think? Or it's just...
I think you may be given some numbers that are worked out, and it might say select which project would you select, and it'll maybe give you 3 and they've worked out the NPV.
Right.
It'd be just a matter of saying, well, you'd reject project B because it's negative, and project A has, yeah. So it will be more holistic. But you might be asked on how would you calculate the discount factor, which is, do you use 3%, 5%, 12%? But it does say calculating. Can you see that it does say calculate the net present values? So we'll see. So how do you convince money? Well, you need a business case, don't we? Cost benefit. We need to assess whether the project's worthwhile. Payback, accounting rate of return, net present value, internal rate of return. And I've deleted from the slides the profitability index because we don't need that. So at a very high level, we can see there are discounted techniques such as NPV on the left there and internal rate of return. And then there are non-discounting techniques which are named on your syllabus: payback and accounting rate of return. So 4 methods you've got to learn. We know why companies invest. It's not a precise science, so quality factors are important as well. So payback is easy. How long does it pay for itself? Well, that example is 2 years. There's another example, a bit more complex there, Carly, I think. It shows 50,000 initial investment. That's in brackets because we've spent it now. And then we get back 10, 15, 20, 25, 25. And to calculate the payback, we have to add up the cumulative column here on the right. There is a slight chance that you could get an exam where that end column is not completed. You might just have to work down that column. So you put the 50 in as negative, then you get 10, so it's 40 negative. Then you get 15, so it's 25. So it's just like your bank balance. And then your granny gives you 20. You're still 5,000 overdrawn. And then in year 4, you finally have some money in your bank account. You have 20,000. So it took.
Dave?
Yeah.
Will you do? Is this one of the questions on the bank of questions that you've put together?
Yes,
or...
there is some calculations like this.
Okay, cool. All right.
Yeah, definitely. So basically, when you get, can you see it was minus there in year 3, and it went positive there in year 4? So when you're working out how long, you look at what was owed 5 the year before and divide it by how much you get the year after. Can you see 5 divided by 25? And that gives you 0.2 of a year. So that's where the 3.2 came from. So no matter what figures you get, you always go to what you owed the year before, you went positive, and then look how much you're getting in the year after, and just pro rata it. You could times it by 12 if you wanted it in months. So you could have times that by 12 if you wanted it in months, or times it by 52. So there is some simple examples like that. So that's payback, but just be familiar with these tables. This is how it's set out when you're doing net present value. Advantages, quick, easy, takes account of risk, but it ignores what happens after payback, so it doesn't look at all the numbers. Can encourage short-termism, and it doesn't take account of the time value of money. So it does have some limitations. The other one is the accounting rate of return, which is the annual average profit divided by the initial cost of investment. The study guides got the wrong formula. It's very misleading. They talk about they talk about the return, but they don't actually tell you how to calculate the return. But what we mean by return is profit. So it's how much money you get in less what you paid is your return or profit. So be very careful with that word return. And it's very easy to calculate. There's one. You're going to get 10,000 a year for 5 years. Cost 20,000. The profit is therefore 30 because you get 50,000 back, and you've spent 20. So the profit, or as SIPs call it, the return is 30. 30 divided by 5 is 6. 6 divided by what you spend. So you're getting a 30% yield. So it's good. It's a very high return, that. It takes no account of a project's life, takes no account of the timings, and it uses profits, which is quite subjective, is ARR. And there's a revision slide, advantages, disadvantages. I think that's more likely what you're going to get asked, them sort of things. Which of these is an advantage of accounting rate of return, or which of these is a disadvantage? And then we've got the discounting methods. And all that means is we make the numbers smaller by discounting. So we work out the present value of all the returns, look at what we spend, and the difference is net. So if the present value of everything we get back is higher than what we spend, it's got to be a good project. So we need to discount the factors. Let's have a look at discounting. No, I don't want to do that math. The present value of £500 is 10 years' time. If we looked at discount rates of 4.25, we'd go to a book and we'd get that number, 0.659. You would not be asked to calculate it. So we go to a book, get that number and times it. So in fact, when we're doing the calculation, we don't use the 500, we use the 329 in the figures because we discount it to reduce it. So that's all discounting is, reducing the actual value to give you the present value. So there's a set of discount tables from textbooks. And if we look at the 10% table, we can see £100 in a year's time is only worth £90.90 at today's prices. And £100 6 years in the future is only worth, it's £56.40 really, because it's not worth as much. So we just look at the discount factor and there. So we've got the same example we did earlier, I think. We spend 50,000 and we get back 25, 45, 70, 105. So you think, well, that's a good project. We get back 105 and we've only spent 50. But when we're using discounting techniques, we don't use them numbers, we reduce them and use the slightly smaller numbers. And if we add them up, we get 75,000. And we spent 50, so the net present value is the difference, it's 25,000. So, just to get rid of some misconceptions, that isn't profit, that is surplus above the 10% that you wanted. So if that was 0, it's wrong to say the project's no good. The project's good because it's earned exactly 10%. So the net present value tells you, have you earned the minimum that you want? This company says it has to be 10%. Well, we've got a surplus of 25,000, so it's earned more than 10%. We don't know how much, but it's more than 10. But that project is a goer because NPV is positive. And if we looked at some different discount tables, say if we looked at 12% discount table and put the new numbers in there, that would probably come to 0, which would mean the internal rate of return is 12%. So the internal rate of return is the discount factor that makes the NPV exactly 0. I'll pause at that. So NPV, if it's bigger than 0, accept the project. If it's less than 0, reject it. NPV 0, yes, it's acceptable. So here's an example. Project. Payback is 4 years. But which is the better project? Which would you go for? Sorry, I've done the cumulative concentrate. Sorry, payback's 4 years because we've calculated the column to the right here. So it's exactly 4 years. And if we look at project B, the project's 4 years, 9 months on this, so slightly longer. So on payback, project A is better. But if we do discounting, same numbers, and then we discount them and reduce them, that comes out negative, so we'd reject project A as no good. Even though it's paid for itself under payback, it actually doesn't give us the 10% return. And project B is a goer because the NPV is positive. So just look at them numbers, yeah, so right. Advantages, takes account of cost of money, or the cost of capital as it's often called. Considers different scenarios, but it's complex, people misunderstand it, and it only really works if projects' investment values are the same. Internal rate of return is simply where the NPV is 0. So we work out the rate to make it 0. Cash outflows. So we use cash outflows or cash flows when we're doing investment appraisal. The opportunity cost of capital is the discount rate. Advantages of using DCF techniques. It's the better method and it's the most widely used method. Takes account of all cash flows and it looks at actual cash flows. But which method we use depends on how accurate we want it. Many considerations. Depends on objectives of the company, experience, risk. So how do we come up with this discount rate? Well, the textbooks would say we'd calculate it using WACC, WACC, the weighted average cost of capital. So how much does it cost your company to raise the money that's in the company? Well, if you're in the public sector, it's probably whatever it costs the government to borrow it, say 2%. But if you're in the private sector, you're paying dividends to shareholders and you're probably borrowing money as well. So it's a mixture of how much your debt is and your equity. And there's a very simple calculation where it comes out at 9.2% because the company has money from the shareholders, and they tend to give them 10% dividend, and they have a loan where they're paying 8%. Because we've got different amounts of money, we use the weightings to say, well, actually, the share capital costs us 10, the loan capital costs us 8. Therefore, the average cost of capital is 9.2%. I can't see this calc being given, but the concept of cost of capital equals discount factor equals weighted average cost of capital is probably important. Right. I think I'll just stop there and just see if we've got some questions. It'll just take a second to drop out. Discard the thing. So yeah, that takes us to slide 132. And there is, I say only, there are 224 in this deck. I personally think, and I'll take advice from you, are you happy? Just ask a few questions on that and let's do the rest of it next week.
Yeah, that's fine with me. I mean, I can't make next week, but if you record it again, I can.
Are you okay with that, Ryan? Yeah. I just think it'd be too much of a whack, all of it, but I will record it and I'll click it onto YouTube and send you the link, Ryan.
We did this under L6M2, didn't we, Dave? The Global Commercial Strategy.
Yes.
Yeah. So if I just read over my notes and stuff from how I understood it then, it's the same?
For the investment appraisal, you mean?
Yeah, for these calculations and things.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
it's certainly in the revision notes that I've done.
Yeah. Okay. I have to try and see. This is the bit that I get stressed about because I'm not very good at the calculations. You know, when you don't use them,
Yeah.
you kind of lose how they work. So I'll just have to focus on that
Yeah.
for a little bit.
And maybe go onto the question bank and just wade through till you get a question on it. There are several in there.
Yeah.
You're more likely, you could be given a table, couldn't you, on some numbers, but it might be more just a question of reading off from the table and saying, well, you'd pick this investment because even though payback's quicker, net present value is high, they might give you a comparison.
Yeah. Okay.
But it is quite technical, isn't it? The section 1 is very technical, whereas section 3, when we do it on change of management, is quite fluffy.
Is it?
Culture, yeah. There's a few models of culture and stuff, but nothing as technical as what we've covered this morning.
Okay.
What do you think, Carly, there? She's gone. But I know Carly's not taking it until November. I think we've lost Carly.
So there's just so much that can crop up for question 1. So there's
There is, right?
all of this that could be like, what, 10 or 15 questions?
Yeah.
It's like the logistics one that I did a few weeks back. I went through your question bank hundreds of times and then still just really struggled with the exam with just random things that came up.
Yeah, I felt the same, Ryan.
I think they do throw random stuff in. It's quite
It was really wordy.
Yeah, and a lot of it, I think they try and catch you out, which I don't think is fair. It could be.
There could have been more than one answer, I reckon, for some of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
it was